social capacity, it's like, okay, am I doing a group activity, going buying groceries at Walmart? I mean, there's 500 people in the store, but am I engaging with them in any meaningful way? Likely not.
Well,
and
it might be like the old Ultima Online days. You might get attacked depending on the day you go.
Just run away from people.
Black Friday, you get in there. I just want to get my
there's
TV.
There's a competition. Okay. Shift the context a little bit. Okay, we'll play.
So
okay.
there's
your key phrase.
Black Friday shopping is basically like hunting rares in Ultima Online. Got it.
Oh.
See, I was just about to say, like, you know, since you always need your phrase read, there's your phrase. Black Friday is an MMO.
Pong is an RPG and Black Friday is an MMO. Welcome everybody to Skip the Dialogue. I have with me Man of Rohan, Desryn, and our guest Marl, who I have been calling Marley forever.
You can keep calling me Marley. It probably is pronounced that way.
And so you know me, you know our co-host, but Marl, please introduce yourself to all these people that do not know you yet, but will soon know you because you're an excellent content creator for MMOs.
That's really kind. Thank you so much. So I go by MarleMMO, but per Red's indication, the story goes back a little bit of time, but my title is a Chrono Trigger reference. And so I'm thinking about when we were originally playing that RPG 25 years ago or so. Everyone had a different way to internally pronounce the name. So I took away Marl, but apparently it's more commonly pronounced Marley. So the little fun tidbit there. But anyways, I've been a MMO content creator for a couple of years, and I actually got connected with Red. Man, we were just talking about that before the podcast began. What was that? Was that 2 years ago? When did we do the collaboration?
I think right about 2 years ago at this point.
Oh man, time flies. Okay. But I've been connected with Desryn and Rohan here last 30 minutes or so.
Yep.
Yeah. And so
we're fast friends.
I like that, some alliteration. So in terms of MMO coverage, it's interesting in the YouTube space or even streaming, even though I haven't begun streaming yet, is oftentimes it's your perspective that's the differentiating factor between different creators, unless you have like a audio visual background and you're good at post-production with video, which I'm learning those skills. But oftentimes it can come down to simply how you see what you see and how you describe it. And so, I mean, my office, in fact, is a representation of my personal history. And I think that helps color the way that I approach covering the MMORPG genre. And so behind me, you see a piano. Admittedly, it's a little misleading because when I was a teenager, I played music professionally, but I played drum kit, though my instructor required me to have classical piano for like 6 months to read the music notation.
Good.
And so so I played music professionally, traveled around, had invitations to like South Korea and Egypt. And so it was a really cool 10 years, actually. But as any of us know, you get married, have a kid. The economy of music doesn't always scale with life's expenses. So I transitioned, and it's actually funny thinking through my history because a lot of my like financial decisions ended up like not matching really what the cost of living was. So I was like, hey, so I decided to transition, and I got a vocational bachelor's in biblical theology, thinking that, oh, maybe I want to go into the ministry. But then did that for a couple of years, realized that wasn't the right path for me at the time. And so, however, my interest in ancient literature, ancient history, historiography, that still captivated me. So I decided, well, maybe I'm going to go be a professor. So I decided I was going to go and get a PhD. So we moved across the country, and I got a second bachelor's in classical philology, which is just a kind of complicated way to say I studied ancient Latin and Greek for a lot. I was in that program for 6 years. And so, you know, our coursework, which is actually really cool, we're translating from Latin Lucretius, or in Greek, we're reading Plato and Homer. And so what's interesting about that exposure is from an MMORPG content creation standpoint is I've been exposed to narratological structures at the highest level. And so in order to understand story and how it's also presented to the player, how it's received, in fact, reception theory was one of the main skill sets of my department. It enables me to have just a different perspective when thinking about story in context to a shared virtual space, beyond simply a main quest lines. Like, what's the story between the individuals, the different players? What story are individual servers crafting? And so having that perspective, I think is helpful. And of course, my experience in music gives me perspective in terms of analyzing soundscapes. But beyond that, I think about, Star Wars Galaxies, or Project Gorgon, Black Desert Online, Lotro, actually, with its music and theater system, that intersocial, that intersubjective relationship with respect to these social dynamics, it's intrinsically human. And so it's really, really fun to explore from someone who had professional experience looking at those dynamics within an MMORPG, a shared virtual space. My life transitioned when I was in my PhD program. My wife became very sick, exceptionally sick. So I had to transition out of that. And so I moved into an audio visual role, which helps with at least, setting stuff like this up.
Yeah, for sure.
And then it was a couple years ago, I got an invitation to change careers. And finally, my life from a fiscal perspective is not always in the red. And I now work in data centers, which is actually, I think, an interesting opportunity, because we've all logged into servers. If you have Guild Wars 2 mega server technology, you have, I think it was a year or two ago, Final Fantasy 14, they redid the way their data centers were able to I'd have to see what their actual application logic is. But originally, you were only limited to that server or that server structure. I forget exactly. It's been a couple of years. So having now professional experience on the back end, like the infrastructure side of MMOs, is actually pretty cool. Because even like Star Wars: The Old Republic, they're moving to the Azure cloud, right? And so, half of my job is in our co-location cloud space. And so having this technical perspective while engaging with the game side, I think is kind of cool, because you can kind of look underneath the hood. Oh, yeah. And then last yet not least, I'm wearing a gi. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Saw that, yeah.
You can see my old 4-stripe white belt right there. So I train jiu-jitsu. In fact, you may be able to see it. I'm still sweaty from training this morning. And so with respect to martial arts training, is when you're diagnosing combat systems and you're thinking about the dance between complexity and complication, the fun factor, having access to a martial art in which you are actively sparring with resisting opponents just gives a different perspective. And, adjacent to jiu-jitsu is a bit of wrestling, a bit of judo. And so I say all of that to say that when I approach an MMORPG, I have all of those lenses, all those little monocles I can put on, depending what the vibe is, what the tool set is of the developers in the game for me to take a look at. And so in addition, I've been playing MMOs since pre-Sony EverQuest, Verant days, Verant, however you pronounce that. So,
Verant,
I think it's Verant. Yeah.
Verant.
So
you guys are
Verant.
wrong.
Oh my gosh.
Ain't. Anyways, but so this may be the most important. I don't know, but I've been playing MMOs since, I guess, like the internet happened in my house. I've played 99% of them. It's my favorite genre. Yeah. I still remember playing. I was in Kellethan and seeing other avatars moving around and realizing I was not an NPC. I'll never forget that memory. Just completely shattered my 11, 12-year-old brain. And so it's also helpful in that there's a history. We've all seen the genre expand, grow, flower, some disease. And so having that perspective, and it's not neither good or bad. It's simply we have this journey, we have this history, there's the story within the genre itself. So I'm also very deeply tied to our collective story and the story of those watching. So that's a little summary, sorry from the monologue, but that's a little bit of who I am.
Well, I can see why Theric likes you.
Yeah.
Oh well, I was gonna say, like I'm about to pack up my YouTube channel. because Marl is
Oh my
eminently more
gosh.
qualified to talk about MMOs than I am. So I will
I was
just
just-
back it up. Give it to
I'm
Marl.
just gonna say, what's
what?
the bet we're going long tonight? That's what I was gonna say.
Like you said, it's your perspective. That's the important part is you don't share the same exact approach. So
No,
That's,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. You have a story that I don't have access to. I mean, you're a published author, Red, right? I can't say that. So from
Well,
a story
it's
perspective, the tempo, the pacing,
Yeah, well,
the
and-
narratology, that's an edge you got, man.
We even share the history background as well, because I went and got my I got a bachelor's and a master's in history. And,
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I was
What
gonna
time period?
go
You
the PhD route, and then I got talked out
Uh-huh.
of it. So
PhDs are hard, and
Yeah.
if you don't have a fellowship, then they're like 7 years.
yeah,
but
it was
yeah,
the leaving my wife for 5 to 7 years for a history PhD.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah. We don't have to
Yeah.
get super sidetracked, but I am curious, what time period were you particularly gonna
um,
emphasize?
the basically the Tokugawa era in Japan was my area of focus.
Okay, we will have many conversations off screen.
Yes.
because that is super cool.
before we put Des and Men of Rohan to
I
sleep.
was about to say nerd alert.
I will
No.
proudly
No,
wear
I
that
love
hat.
I'm kidding. I'm completely kidding. There's a lot of connective tissue between my story and yours, Marl. So-
Yeah, go ahead. What's up?
Oh well, we don't totally need to go. But I was a music major in college as well, and
Okay.
I
What did you play?
Voice major and
Yeah,
played piano.
singer. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Drums a little bit, and guitar a little bit. But but I also found pretty quickly that music was not the life
It's
I
tough,
would
dude.
want to choose to make
Yeah.
any money. So
Yep,
so I also went into eventually. I know you had other paths, but into creating software essentially. So I went into
Are you a developer?
computers. No, I lead a team that develops. So
Oh,
so
interesting.
more the business analyst route.
Okay,
QA,
sure. Yep,
the
mhm.
business analyst to,
A lot of SQL.
I do myself, but
Yeah,
yeah.
uh-huh.
So anyway,
Yep.
Fun
but
fact,
yeah, so
the intro and outro for this podcast is created by none other than Man of Rohan. And it's
the
really
artist.
great.
and every
really
time I
great
hear it,
music.
I'm like, I can make that better. I gotta do something.
yeah, yeah.
that inner critic, that inner voice. Yeah.
That's why I don't read my books, Man of Rohan, because
Oh, yeah.
the same thing happens, and I have
That's
access.
why I
to
don't read them
change
either.
I've heard
Yeah, so I'm
that is a
just
common
Wow.
detail amongst artists. In
Yeah.
fact, the CDs I have played on, I've never listened to. Come to think of it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's funny. Yeah.
So one last thing, and then we can get on to the actual subject before I keep
haven't
rambling.
talked about the
But
subject yet.
Marl. we don't have a subject yet. Oh, okay.
Good, Nicole.
I'm saying we know.
I'm leading us astray. I'm sorry.
No,
It's just interesting.
Marl is certainly the right way because if you play Final Fantasy Remake, there is a character in that. Her name is Marl, and that's what they call her. So, and that's Square as well. So, you
Who
have
would have
to
known?
now. You know it really is Marl.
I've
So
been right all along. Yeah.
And
the-
Red's been wrong. That's all that really matters.
I think
in this
that's
podcast.
that's the title of the
I'm
podcast.
just
Red
catching
was wrong.
strays from Des.
So, yeah,
I'm glad that
Desryn,
you caught that. That was probably the most brutal thing I've ever said to you.
so Desryn, how do our lives harmonize?
Hmm.
We already have the Man of Rohan, the
I mean, there's
Red
a little
beard,
bit
the-
of music background.
Uh-huh.
I played guitar and I never sang professionally, but we do have the religious background in common, and that was part of my music stuff.
sure. Yeah, same for me.
But I mean, then all the MMO stuff and
Mhm.
development side. I'm an indie dev. I think I can
Oh,
confidently say
interesting.
that now.
Hey, well, congrats. That's not
maybe
easy.
maybe I can't. Maybe that's just something that never is official. But
Look. Okay.
Are you
so
on the
yeah.
programming side, or are you an artist? Are you music?
I do dabble at everything because
Okay.
I'm me, one person.
No, that's cool.
But yeah,
Mhm.
I'm also a kind of like I've done a lot of like all sorts of random things,
Mhm.
in my life. So it's like I've got a small amount of experience in like just a bunch of stuff. So I'm definitely embodying the like jack of no trades kind of a thing. But I also very much value having a wide perspective,
Oh,
and
for sure.
and
Yeah.
so that's kind of why I embrace that, and why I'm kind of just sitting back and just enjoying, absorbing everybody's life here. I'm like, oh man, this is This is my kind of thing. I like being
Yeah,
around
the
people.
Soul Brothers here.
You know?
Yeah, so many commonalities. Yeah, it's so cool.
I wanted
That
to
have led us here. Yeah.
interject here, Des, because you made a comment of like, basically like backing off, saying calling yourself an indie dev, and it's the kind of shit that I used to do all the damn time with writing. I'd be like, I'm an aspiring or whatever, like whatever bullshit of trying to like talk away from writing, like that I was saying that like I'm an author or whatever. You're an indie dev. Like you're doing the thing. That's all that matters.
Well, it's like same in that vein. It's like I wrote for maybe 6 years, never finished anything.
You're a writer.
But I bet you
don't
also
have to
learned a
finish it.
lot in those 6 years,
Yeah.
right?
You're a
Right.
writer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I suck at
the
jiu-jitsu,
thing.
but I trained.
Yeah.
There you go. We've got all the self-deprecation out of the way.
man,
So, like,
Yeah. All right.
and
So
for the record, I've bought your book. Just to
I have
set
to.
that straight.
you didn't.
I have
like
to.
you just took away all the venom from the stray that you
I
did
can't
earlier.
be seriously mean. At least not to you.
Just facetiously.
Yeah.
All right, we actually did have a topic of the podcast
What?
today, but before that, we were just gonna like pull out the actual topic. What have y'all been up to this week? What have you been playing? What have you been doing? Anyone can start. Whoever wants to go into it.
It feels horrible to say I'm in my mid 30s. My brain still feels like I'm 18. With the inflation of like taking care of a house and the wife's car needs to be fixed and all the social requirements on one's life, I've found myself consuming a lot of audiobooks because what I found in terms of playtime, I have to basically overlap any game I play, which is, for the sake of my channel, is going to be an MMO, but it also has to be strategically played so I can produce content with it, right? But the spare time, which is more just me double dipping, has actually been, I've been going through the Warhammer fantasy series. There's an End Time series. I think it's a 2-part, but then there's also a Gortrix and Felix. There's a 12-part series, and that's been super, super enjoyable. Sadly, I haven't been able to play as much as I've wanted to, but when I can, I try to make it count. But it's been busy in real life recently. I've been being sick for 2 weeks, and just gotta make do.
I've been I've gone back to EverQuest. So
nice.
Oh man,
retail.
That old drug.
progression servers. Yeah. So I've been looking for something to kind of just like play mindlessly, and so EverQuest, the Mischief and Thornblade servers just added mercenaries, and mercenaries essentially make EverQuest mindless at certain points. It gets harder difficulty as you level up and everything, and they're no longer as OP as they once were, but it's been just nice to just play some EverQuest for a little while every couple of days. And then in the meantime, that's the only game I've been playing because I'm getting ready to go on vacation. So I need to make sure that there's a lot of content that'll be coming out during that time. So the boring shit is I've got lots of scripts that are written for stuff that's coming out. Some of it's good, some of it's not good, some of it's gonna be shit. But I did a video on WoW, and it's still it's not below 90% yet. So there's that. It is more disliked at this point than my video on Pantheon's 247. So that's an interesting thing that has happened recently.
What's the headline version? What argument were you making in your
I was
your
just
video?
like I was excited for WoW, and
okay.
I
see
did
people
happy.
didn't like you being
No.
happy about it. Okay, yeah, that sounds right.
Yep.
Sorry, man.
I've been playing a lot of Return to Moria lately. So,
Oh yeah.
So
How's that? I've seen a bazooka amount of ads for it, but I haven't played it.
Yeah, it has been super fun. I like survival to an extent. I really like rebuilding and like redeeming areas. So I like making it right, in my mind at least, and making things right. So there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of getting ambushed by orcs and other things. So that's kind of annoying, but that's part of it. I've died many times.
Is it in the survival genre?
Yeah, so you definitely
did
have
not
to
know
eat.
that.
You have to you have to sleep. You have to stay warm. It's not and it's not really
Yeah, it's like
crazy.
Valheim level of survival.
Yeah, it's not a super
So yeah, it's a
restrictive,
survival game then. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so I've been playing alone a bit, but it's way funner with more people. So
That's
playing
ironic.
Co-op.
But
Yeah,
That's perfect.
So,
I wonder
Yeah.
if that's going to echo throughout our conversation later with the topic. But go ahead.
It's
Yeah,
kind of,
oh,
We're,
yeah.
we're
Oh.
that kinda flows
slowly
really
like
well.
moving into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I know.
Man of-
Yeah, teasing, foreshadowing.
Man of Rohan, if you want to play sometime, let me know. I got the
Did
game,
you?
and I just I loaded it up, played it for a little bit. I got jump scared by some goblins.
oh yeah, and they talk. Well, like you can't see
They
them,
talk?
and they're like,
Oh wait, I heard like the
Are they taunting you?
like a story
Yes.
part from it.
Is it
Yeah.
like a kid's haunted house where you hear these just screams that are targeted at you, but you have no
it's
idea
a little
where?
like that. Yeah, they're like around the corner, and then if you went around the corner, they're there. So it's not like you're just hearing these,
Not just misdirection.
ethereal voices. They're really over there. So it gives you a little bit of ramp up. Like if you were to go near the goblins at the beginning, they run away. They like go underground, they jump in the ground or whatever. But as soon as you pass a certain threshold, then in the kind of beginning, then they start attacking you. And
Okay.
a little relentlessly. And the more noise you make, the more attacking you get. So while you're
Is
mining,
that a function of like weight of armor or?
yeah. So it's footsteps
okay.
if you're running, if you are, if you're making too much noise in mining or building or doing anything. Yeah. So,
That's pretty cool. Yeah. that's
Yeah,
a cool
it's been
system.
super
Yeah.
fun. So
It's up to how many players? Is it 8?
I don't know. I only have 2 so far.
Concurrently?
So I don't. I assume
Oh,
it's,
if it's up to 8, that'd be awesome.
I keep.
Can
I
you
keep getting
host a local
confused.
server,
Yeah.
or is it peer to peer?
It's all just you go through the internet. So
It's
I
peer.
should,
It's peer to peer.
It's yeah.
I should know what
Valheim.
what the right term is.
I
but-
don't think they have dedicated servers yet. Like
So it's
pretty
not like
much all
Ark
of
or
these
Conan.
games. Yeah, like a lot of these games, they start out with the really simple multiplayer,
Mhm.
and then they eventually will probably have a dedicated server.
It's I'm
yeah.
getting confused with like I really feel like, and this is a little off topic. And Des, I'm sorry, not to. Well, just hold on one second.
Oh, it's fine.
But like it's we're at a point I think where survival games are like we're like at the crest of something huge with them all with Enshrouded, with Return to Moria, with
Yep.
Nightingale, with Valheim potentially coming up on like an actual release soon. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. But
Yeah.
Des, what have you been up to?
Been being jealous of Man of Rohan because I don't have Return to Moria yet. But and I know I'm super late to this. I have a really good friend that bought me Baldur's Gate 3
Yes.
last week. So I am
in your
very
same
thankful.
team, man. Same team. Go ahead,
Very
didn't mean to
thankful for that.
interrupt.
But yeah, I've got a small amount of hours in that so far, and it has been on my mind literally since I played. Like all I want is to play that, but I have other even gaming obligations. So finally got to do some grouping again in EQ2 off stream for once, which has been great. EQ2 Varsoon, if anyone didn't know.
Is that one of the progression realms?
Yeah. It's honestly it's the progression realm.
Y'all are on
'cause-
Kunark still, right? Or have you moved
Rise
past
of
that?
Kunark, yeah.
Yeah. That's
So
like the best
it's
expansion.
about to go downhill in December, but like for now it's still pretty good.
What's the next expansion? I forget.
Shadow
my
Odyssey.
lineage.
Yeah, I
Okay.
always screw up the next two as well because they both suck. So
Shadow
That's
Odyssey,
like-
I just remember.
that's when I stopped playing. So
Yeah,
it's all fuzzy,
Shadow
Yeah,
Odyssey was the one where Shadow Knights just became like incredibly OP. That's all I remember about
Shadow Odyssey is when they were like, you know what would make everything more fun? Progression solely through dailies. That sounds great, doesn't it?
No,
Anyway.
I don't like-
Oh no.
So yeah,
I had blocked that out.
yeah, it's
PTSD,
pretty rough.
yeah,
It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Baldur's Gate 3 a little bit, EQ2 a little bit,
Mhm.
and Star Citizen actually.
Yeah.
Really?
little bit.
Interesting.
Me
Yeah.
too, a little bit
Okay.
actually, Des.
A little bit. Did you get some preview channel action? Get
I
into Pyro there?
did. I have not. I've just
All
been
right, all
playing
right.
the whatever. What I haven't played since Citizen Con. So I was
Well, yeah,
playing-
because you go from Citizen Con to live, and you're like, it's It feels like detox, man.
Yeah.
It feels like detox. But yeah, so I think that's about it. I've barely been gaming. I mean, I've been doing other gaming, but I can't really talk about that.
Yeah.
So it's I don't play as much games as I as I should or want to or need to.
Life,
But,
man.
Yeah.
I feel you.
Life gets in
I'm
the
there
way.
too. Got to make the little time you have count.
Yeah. But now that we're like 30 minutes in, what
shall we talk
What's our-
about?
Well, I'm just like blown away that Dez is finally playing Baldur's Gate 3. So like,
dude, I was waiting on a sale so hard. I was like, man, as soon as like even just like 15% off, I could like justify it in my mind. And it's a single player / co-op. I wasn't in a hurry. But yeah, so I've.
Well, I can do the worst
for some-
sin. I pre-ordered it and I've only played like 45 minutes of it. Not as a function
Oh.
of not because I deserve that.
Red's gone.
I
He's out.
deserve that. Yeah. The challenge is here's the problem. But here's the problem. Okay, I know that if I give the game 1 hour more of my time, it's like you're flirting with the edge of the event horizon. You're circling a black hole, and that's going to suck you in. So I have to very carefully plan, because here's the problem. I play Baldur's Gate 3 or I do YouTube stuff. And right now they're not synonymous. So,
Well,
but outrage is justified.
So like, it's one of those things. Like I have a problem a lot of times with finishing games, especially since like starting a YouTube channel, because
Same.
You need
I
to.
think everyone does.
I don't finish
your
anything.
Your time becomes
Let's just
that much
broaden it.
more.
Anything.
Yeah, like your time is that much more like required, and so but then I was like, okay, I needed something for myself. And I had played Baldur's Gate 3 in early access back in 2021. There's even it's like a point of pride for me, because I wasn't a content creator even like thinking of it at the time. And like I have like one review on Steam, and it's for Baldur's Gate 3, and it says, if they keep going with this game is going to be great. And like that.
Ah,
and
the
like,
prophet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like me and like 95% of the other people, but yes.
Right. Fair point. Yeah.
So
but
a
it was
bandwagon jumper. That's what
exactly.
It is.
But an early, I'm a hipster bandwagon jumper. But like I set it aside for myself, and dude, I was a degenerate. I played that for like two damn weeks. Like that's like the only shit I did.
And that is what's in my future. So yeah,
I finished it though. 200 hours later.
And I imagine that was
190 of that was in Act
right?
1. So
But yeah, no, I'm one of the few people I know that actually have finished it. I've got a lot of friends that are in like Act 2 or just starting Act 3, but there's so many things I just want to talk to people about that game. But you see, I turned it into like shit tons of YouTube videos though. So.
Nice, dude. Well, that's smart.
Speaking of turning things into other things.
That could be a complicated reference.
When shall we turn the corner into the topic?
We're only half an hour into an hour-long podcast talking nothing about the subject except for the
we've had a couple foreshadowing moments.
We have been foreshadowing the conversation of single player versus group play in MMORPGs, and I guess we could expand that out to, since Matt and Rohan brought it up, survival games too, because that's kind of like mini MMOs in some ways, in a lot of ways, when you have, especially when you have like 50 players for Conan Exiles
concurrent.
So half a Star
Citizen can go up a bit more, but in terms of active players, I wonder if like the amount of sign-on from independent IPs, I presume the most active servers probably have more than 1,000 or so, but I speculate. I don't have the data for that, but currently at least.
It is worth noting there's starting to get to be a lot of the crossover there, where it's like MMO is kind of meeting multiplayer. They're not as distant as they used to be, that's for sure.
But isn't that fundamentally ironic? I mean, when I think about, if we break apart the initialism, Massive, which you could make a debate if that talks about the massive capacity or of players, or it's the scope of the game. It's not really well defined. But then you have multiplayer, which unless you view those in with opposition, but it's to me incredibly ironic and perhaps one of the greatest catastrophes that the MMO genre, at least I'm thinking in the past maybe 5 to 7 years, almost all of them are, well, I want to be a bit more careful, maybe not almost all of them, but there is a sizable impact and perspective and the expectation. Maybe this is our fault as players actually for selection factors for developers, but so many that I've played and admittedly enjoyed are more or less online single player games with arguably pretty bad storytelling with optional half-baked multiplayer elements. And I think back to when I first started playing EverQuest. Now, again, through rose-tinted glasses, but to
always
get anywhere, it always is. So the bias, I deserve all the flaming arrows for that. But to get anywhere, even if you were soloing, other players' activities still impacted you. And so when I think about this question about single player or group-based MMOs or maybe group-centric, the question keeps coming back to me, do other players matter? Because I think about when I used to play Ultima Online, and I played mostly in the context of a single player. But every time you went adventuring, other people doing things on your screen, you were always on the watch. This is pre-Tremiel, right? If you went fishing, you had to be on the watch out for pirates. Even though the gameplay for the way I selected for it was inherently single player, it was still an inherently social experience. Versus if I'm thinking about Black Desert Online, and of course there are social features, there are a lot of guilds, there's a lot of group activities, hunting bosses, but I think I've played that MMO for maybe 500 hours since it launched. I think I grouped up once, maybe twice, and the extent to which my play time was affected by another player was hardly noticeable. And so or you can even flip the script, and I'm sorry for monologuing here. You can jump in here, but I also think about I hate to take a swing at retail WoW, but it kind of deserves this in that the grouping, unless it's at the highest echelons of Mythic Plus or rating, if you simply want to hop into an instance, there's a little bit of what someone else does in your party affects the trajectory of success for that given instance, but not really. I remember I was playing, which expansion was it? Must have been Legion, I think. So it's a couple expansions back. Even though I've played a little bit of Dragonflight. But I finished the first zone, and this is just a memory just to give an example. Because like I said, I played a bit of Dragonflight, but I remember finishing the first zone, and the way they did their character arc was you finish a zone, and then there's a dungeon associated with that zone. So I remember hopping into an instance, and I remember the group simply flew through the dungeon full speed ahead, complete sprint. I contributed next to nothing, yet we still won.
ESO.
And so
I was about to bring that up because this is
we have other examples, right?
Yeah, this is an ongoing thing between me and Red, just for context.
No, I appreciate the history, and so the reason I bring that up is because my participation didn't matter, and so I actually felt insulted as a player because I want to me, and this is subjective, but the threshold of fun has to have some dynamic of the risk of losing. And it doesn't necessarily mean like a corpse run in EverQuest 1, but the fact that someone could beat me or an AI could defeat me, that I was outsmarted. But the fact that I know there's a possibility for that, if I overcome that, to me, that's part of the sliver of what constitutes an enjoyable experience.
Well,
so
making go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll be less polite. I'll interrupt. Get out of here.
Get out.
Let me articulate this right. So, encouraging group play or cooperative play the only time I've seen it work is when it's negative, meaning you get in a lot of places, like we encourage group play by saying you get a bonus by being a part of a group.
Making it less efficient to play solo? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. But what I've seen is what you mentioned. It's better to be a group because the rest of the world is so dangerous. It's a negative pressure coming inside. So it's other players, or it's the rest, or that's the PvE portion that forces me to be in a group. It's not a, oh good, if I join this group, then I get some perks. Who cares about perks? Because I can go faster alone. Because I don't have to worry about these other people, because I can just play whenever I want. You know, and I'm definitely at my house, I want people around, but I want them to leave me alone.
Yep.
You know, and that's just me being truthful about it. I like people a lot, you know, but you know, when I'm doing things, for the most part, I'm like, I'll do yard work, and I'm fine if you're out there, but don't try and talk to me. I've got my headphones in and I'm chopping wood or whatever I'm doing. So don't talk
contributing,
to me.
right? And so, in what you do in your capacity as a solo individual within the social structure of your group house still has meaning, still has impact. So for me, the disconnect, to just extend what you're saying, is in the context of an MMO, I actually prefer to solo, usually due to time constraints, and I can't like commit to a 2-hour session just ad hoc. But I want to feel like what I did mattered, or that there's another solo player around the vicinity, or it could be like an abstraction of a solo player. But what they do in that same virtual space matters. Because if it doesn't, then why are they even there? Why even have that structure?
Yeah.
So there's a couple of interesting thoughts that have come up for me through this, because my first MMO was actually Ultima Online as well. Like that was my very first MMO. I was a kid, and I hopped in because my friends said like, hey, this game is cool and fun. So I actually had like some friends that I was actually going to school with at the time, and we worked together. But Ultima Online, for people that don't remember, it had some rudimentary stuff in there. You could kind of group. It had text, but like the text would also go away. They had a little scroll that would kind of keep your text, but most of it, like most like organization, was done over like ICQ or something else, something outside of the game. And for me, Ultima Online, because I played again like you pre-Tremel, which is open PvP, and when you died, your body, you became a ghost and people could loot your body. And so the game was so dangerous that for me, it actually became very antisocial. If I saw a person, I ran away because I wanted nothing to do with them, because chances are I was going to die. Because I mean, and anyone who's played Ultima Online will probably laugh at me for this. I was a provocation fencer. So basically I made potentially one of the worst classes in the game.
Very creative set of decisions there.
It made sense to me at the time. I was a kid. I was eating boogers. I don't know. But like, it kind of like it worked out for me like in a PvE thing, because I could provoke things and kill them. Everything was more difficult, but any other player was going to immediately kill me.
You had no tools to deal with that,
exactly.
right?
Like there was nothing I could do about it. I was just going to die. And so it became very antisocial for me. But there was still, like what you're talking about, like the world still mattered. While I'm running away from someone, I may still have to go talk to that person later because I need to buy something from them at the bank in Britain. You know, like it's so there's still like a social part of it. And then you think back to like Star Wars Galaxies, which was kind of like the extension of that, where they actually had more social elements, but it was still like a very soloable game. I mean, you ran missions by yourself. It's funny because like I look at Star Citizen now. Star Citizen is just like Star Wars Galaxies with new paint and fewer players. Like they're like basically like the entire point of Star Wars or Star Citizen is to run missions, right? That's what Star Wars Galaxies was. Missions could be run together, or missions, and like it's a bit faster, or they can be run solo. You know, it's kind of like that's the process. It's basically just quests. But it's that whole process.
Missions were more boring than quests in Star Wars Galaxies.
Killing, just destroying layers.
It was
stuff.
the same.
They were painfully boring. I do agree with that.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, go kill this camp, and it really was shoot a flag, destroy a flag. That was killing the camp.
As much
you didn't
as
even have to kill the people. You just had to kill the flag.
There were so many things I loved about Star Wars Galaxies. There's so many issues.
Yeah. Sure.
It's really interesting to me that you state that was the main focus of the game, though. Like, is that what you meant?
It was when I say it's the main focus, because obviously with Star Wars Galaxies had a huge, for lack of a better way to phrase it, sandbox element to it. You had towns, you had player towns, you had crafting, you had entertain, and like throughout the time of Star Wars Galaxies, I think the focuses continue to shift like year by year.
Oh God, yeah.
And I'm not even just talking about NGE. I'm just talking about like in general, they started to shift. But you had like, and then like we even with changes to how entertainers worked and stuff like that. But there were other elements. Like I still remember, I think like the most social fun thing I can remember of Star Wars Galaxies had nothing to do with danger and just had to do with, oh, cool. If I join this group in the cantina and I play this instrument and they play this instrument, we make a new song. And like that was like one of the coolest things in the game. And you level up by doing it. Yep. And it was like, and there was no practical benefit to it at first either. Like they later added buffs and shit, but at first it was just for fun, right? And like that was like the social part of it. And
wasn't that ironic?
It really was.
In game there was originally no reward, but the reward was actually having fun. Isn't that why we play games?
That's what I was thinking. When Red's talking about his build, imagine playing a game and just like building whatever sounds fun, No, imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So there's the recipe there.
Yeah.
So you have all these additional layers on top to try to entice people to do something that even doesn't feel fun. Even Rohan, you're talking about that I would rather play solo because it's more effective rather than join this party of strangers when there's no real collaboration just for some numbers to go up in a database somewhere, right? Versus Red saying, hey, let's disregard all the mechanical gibberish. Not saying all mechanics are bad, but that the source of fun was laying that aside.
It's really interesting how it's played out in different games, because like I think like the mechanics of EverQuest actually work to fundamentally cause social interaction. So like I mean because it wasn't a sandbox. Like it was like everyone had one thing to do. There was one direction to go and it was forward. There wasn't really much else to do in EverQuest. Whereas Star Wars Galaxies, there were multiple ways to go out. Ultima Online, there were still multiple ways. I mean, if you were a crafter in Ultima Online, you probably didn't venture very far, kind of thing. Or you had other people do it for you, or you logged in an alt to do it. And so like there's different ways to do it. So I think there's games that have tried to like kind of include that. Like even think of EverQuest 2, there's a whole thriving culture of players that do so much with housing and the really crazy housing like systems they have. And so like their goals may be completely different from say someone else's goals, but they may overlap because an item for a house may be in a dungeon. And so that may lead them to that, but they're going for the item for the house. This person is going for the experience, right?
Can I throw something really random into that just on that topic? Because we actually have someone that is familiar with Black Desert. Just as a funny observation, how powerful the housing community was in EQ2. And there's a lot you could do in housing in EQ2 for sure. But likewise, Black Desert's housing, which is also pretty good. They actually have in-game rewards, like tangible rewards for being like the best house, in each address.
And leaderboards, like house leaderboards.
Pretty much, yeah. I don't want to get into that too much because then when we start talking about pay to win and I just get angry. But I think it's fascinating that even though there's tangible reward for Black Desert housing, the community around housing in Black Desert is not nearly as powerful as the EQ2 one.
Do you think it's a function that EQ2 with respect to the housing system is fundamentally more social?
Yep, that's exactly what I would say.
There you go.
People actually utilize their houses for social events. And I mean, that, like I said, there was a lot you could do with them, but nothing really like tangible until Guildhalls came in, which ironically made the game less massively social. But yeah, that's exactly it. It was just, they gave the tools to the players to have a good time. in a social setting, and they just kind of ran with it, versus incentivizing some kind of because it's only benefits you, right? In Black Desert, like this, it's literally just for you. Then that didn't make it more social. So, people do go where the incentives lie, and sometimes the incentive is a social good time.
Well, that's why
go ahead,
I was saying that's why I don't do anything. I mean, I do a little bit, but in like Skyrim and other single players where you can make a better house and they have some of that stuff in some of those single player ones. I'm like, but why? No one's going to see it. I guess I mean,
some people enjoy that loop.
There's no social impact, right?
I mean, some people just enjoy that loop, though. The kind of like
but
build and improve.
I'm
that person. Like,
Yeah,
I totally do
brag.
that.
I want people to see that I did something cool.
And
what's the point
this
of
is
a
probably
trophy?
where we're really going to get into stuff. Is now we were talking about massively multiplayer, right?
Which massively was made up by John Smedley just to sound cool. I think we should all be
I think
clear
it's
on
pretty
that.
descriptive. Honestly, I think
It
it's
is.
pretty descriptive because
if you ask, even if you ask the four of us on this, how would you explain a massively multiplayer online role playing game? We all have different ways to say it. It is one of the most divisive questions you can put out there, and like I've even like briefly talked about it in a video before, and the comments on it were just. Because some people are like, oh, it has to have 1,000 players. Some people have it has to have 500 players. It has to have 5,000 players. And I think that's why I'm pretty sure like Star Citizen is just saying persistent world, because that's the easier way to put it. Because persistent world.
Well, Star Citizen isn't an MMO currently.
Yeah, it's a persistent world. It can't be and by definitions of other players, it can't be an MMO because you only have 100-player server. So,
but what's ironic is you can play one of the top 5 MMOs, play for 400 hours and not have to socialize a single time.
100%,
So
yeah.
how meaningful of a definition is that if you're simply judging the game categorically on player capacity versus the actual impact of the online community? To me, that's where the heart of the matter is. Thinking about social capacity, it's like, okay, am I doing a group activity, buying groceries at Walmart? I mean, there's 500 people in the store, but am I engaging with them in any meaningful way? Likely not.
Well,
and
it might be like the old Ultima Online days. You might get attacked depending on the day you go.
just run away from people.
Black Friday, you get in there. I just want to get my
There's
TV.
some competition. Okay. You shift the context a little bit. Okay, we'll play it.
So
okay.
There's your key phrase.
Black Friday shopping is basically like hunting rares in Ultima Online. Got it.
Oh,
See, I was just about to say, like, since you always need your phrase read, there's your phrase. Black Friday is an MMO.
Pong is an RPG and Black Friday is an MMO.
On that note, though, and this is something I was totally thinking of when we first started talking about kind of definition of MMOs and stuff. But and I know we're still kind of talking about like solo and group and stuff. But for me, it's literally just how much can you influence a world with other players, and if you cannot influence more than however X is your threshold for massive. That's when I say it's not a massively multiplayer game, personally.
Do you have an example on either side of that ratio?
The numbers side?
Yeah, is there maybe another way to say it is there
I would say like Conan, Conan Exiles, not
players.
an MMO, because you're limited in your influence. And limited
I think
you're limited to the server you're on, because there's no like character transfer or anything like that between servers, right?
yeah.
So help me connect the dots. Why is server transfer tech? Why is that required?
So
for
you have
an MMO?
a persistent character,
Uh-huh.
and your ability to use that. I guess I don't want to get like super abstract, but like persistent data, everything attributed to your character to influence other players. And this is where like the number can probably go up or down. But to me, like 50 players, that is pretty limited. Whereas massively multiplayer, I'm thinking if I wanted to, I could influence thousands, tens of thousands, be it economically, be it like PvP, or be it via friendship, you know. The scope is a little different there, but it really just comes down to how much you can persistently influence a world, or, you know, a world with other players.
So if you don't mind me exploring that idea with you, so is the issue for you concurrent influence? Or so let's just hypothetical example. Let's just play with Conan for conversation's sake. Let's say the max currency, I don't know, the most I think I saw was like 90 or something. The server would probably struggle. But let's hypothetically say, so that's the concurrent max. But let's say for whatever reason, maybe there's it's a privately hosted server, and there's it's a role play server, and people are really drawn to that experience. And it sees over the course of an entire month, 10,000 unique players, even though the capacity at any given time is only 50. Does that change your perspective?
Well, it's funny because you're also describing what Star Citizen is now,
Sure.
as kind of funny as that is.
Mhm.
But the difference to me is that the experience isn't persistent.
What do you
Another
mean?
player could be on another server that can have its own set of rules and guidelines and mods and et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So you're not influencing an online world that is persistent. It's only persistent in the extent of a chunk of, you know, like, how would I describe that?
Well, because
So what's the difference to you between, let's say, I mean, I'm thinking about Red's video that he published about the different types of, let's see, so World of Warcraft is going to have retail, but it has its also other versions running concurrently that are functionally different types of WoW. They're not all necessarily interchangeable. So your impact from a virtual social perspective is going to be limited to only one of those slivers of WoW. So I guess explore with me in terms of, I see what you're saying in terms of, from a Conan example, you're limited to just that particular server somewhere, right? So with respect to WoW, now we're going apples to oranges super quick with that. But in terms of, does that definition struggle to maintain its integrity because someone can't move from retail to classic hardcore? That limits their potential.
Yeah, and to help Des out here, I think it's almost like more barriers around a smaller space. So a lot of people consider like classic WoW and retail WoW two different MMOs. A lot of people consider EverQuest progression servers and EverQuest Live two different MMOs. Project 99 is considered a different MMO in a sense. It's so like when the differences get that big, they kind of branch off into their own things. But the thing with like a game like Conan Exiles that has so much customization at a small level, instead of having 3, 4, 5 differences, you're talking about 10, 20, 30, 50, 60, hundreds of differences, because there's so many different ways to customize your server, even just within the basic rule sets they give you. And then on top of that, there's sandbox servers in their own way and stuff like that. But and then for me though, we're kind of like leaning into what is an MMO versus not an MMO more than anything
Which
else
ties
here.
into the solo group based social. These, it's the same heart of the question.
It's like, for me, it gets into the point of like, because when you're talking about like how you can influence the world, Conan Exiles, you can influence other players massively. You can destroy their base, you can kill them, you can like, it's a much smaller, it's a smaller physical space. So you're like the chances of running into each other is higher, kind of thing. And it also lacks some other things that you would generally think of, and it is entirely possible that it's not persistent, because most servers, I would suggest most servers are not going to be running 24/7 over on Conan Exiles. Do they have
or forever?
Yeah, or forever. Yeah. But well,
by the way, I just want to say I'm on your
servers.
guys' team regarding Conan Exiles not being an MMO. I'm simply being devil's advocate to explore how hazy of a definition that even really, my perspective is, right? It's like, where's the boundary, right?
Yeah. It really gets into a crazy level of like, when like and that's why like I'm starting to like the word persistent world more, just because that fits better, because even in a persistent world, Conan Exiles is technically still not that. Except for like, do they have official servers? I can't remember if they do or not.
They do.
Are they 24/7? Okay, that's screwed.
That
Yeah,
I'd have to
so-
speculate. I presume they are, but I don't
Except
know.
for patches. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my friend had a he hosted a WoW private server, and there were a few of us that played on it, but I would definitely not call that a massively, even though all of the structure was there to be one, because he had his own rule set that he could change at the server level, because he was just this guy who did it. You know,
He could just make himself like, a bunch
Right.
of gold out of nowhere. And
Right, and that's actually where I decided finally to, like, I'm not doing any cheats like ever again, is because I gave myself run speed. He gave me some privileges. I gave myself too fast a run speed, and I like flew through some zone, and I'm like, I didn't even see that thing, and it became completely unfun.
Yeah.
The game, but
No journey, right? No
Like
story.
there
it's
was
like
no-
throwing
there-
a Game
there was no-
Shark on.
Right. There was no constraint at all. Anyway, that's a side note. But when it is just some person and they have their own private instance of something, then it doesn't feel massively, because it's not that there is a rule set that's been decided at a server level, let's say a progression server or something. Yes, it's still people doing that, but it's kind of the official world. And everyone else agrees who joins that to join this official world. And then we all live under the same constraints. And that, to me, is what makes it massively, because we are massively agreeing to this level. So of whatever,
This almost sounds like if it's kind of like rulership or is like a dictatorship over the server, it is no longer a massively multiplayer game. Because
So
that's
it's an
essentially what
MMO
Conan Exiles
with
is.
it.
There's one server, one owner of the server.
Yeah,
I'd
so
really like to introduce, because I think this might round it out a little bit. So, because I really want to stick to the ability to influence is one thing, but how about let's add the participation. How participatory is everyone agreeing to be? Because and by participatory I mean agreeing to, like Man of Rohan saying, with all, we're all on the same page, we're all the same rules,
social
same
contract
persistent
theory.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. And that would make a lot of modern MMOs not that massive, as a lot of the player base is not participatory in those social functions, to make it a massive multiplayer experience. They're themselves limiting their participation by playing a certain way.
From a social context, is that the perspective from which we're viewing that?
That's kind
Good
of what I'm
idea.
saying is, I think a massively multiplayer game is just as defined by the players as it is the kind of constraints and rules that make up, how many players can join, or how, big the world is, or all that stuff. I think it's just as much on the players to make it massive as it is the, company that's putting it all together.
I totally agree. And what's really interesting, circling back to Red's description earlier, that you have this early version Star Wars Galaxies, no mechanical benefits, no levels, no experience, yet the game design principle still led players to participate socially in the music system, with the reward of having fun that still remains in Red's brain as a memory, sharing it with us now, propagating out into YouTube. So what a powerful moment that it echoes throughout the corridors of time, even though the devs didn't put, sing 5 songs and you get 5 gold, right?
Yeah. Oh man.
So there's something genius there.
Yeah, I think a lot of how that ends up working is because I think in general, when you look at MMOs across the last 2 decades, over 2 decades, you can kind of see that they all share a lot of similar things. Kind of like when we had the what is an RPG conversation, there's a lot of similarity in it, and it's all based off of like, the functions of an RPG, of like generally progression and stuff like that in some way. But then there's certain MMOs that put their thumb on the scale in certain places, and the more they lean onto that area, the more like it's kind of just like the players just kind of shift. So some will still stay up here and cling to that. There are still players that were, as the shift went more and more towards solo in World of Warcraft, still plenty of players that are focused solely on grouping. It's just the critical mass kind of shifts down into what the developers are kind of suggesting is the way to be most beneficial to the player, especially when, across, I mean, we've already talked about it like at the very beginning of this podcast. We're busy as hell. There's not a lot of time. So and it's just kind of like a human nature to try and find the most, the best way to do things, the most efficient way to do things, the most efficient way to do the most things. And that's why even in a social MMO, even in EverQuest, there were plenty of groups where I wasn't invited because I was either the wrong class, or I wasn't high enough level, or I wasn't good enough. Like my DPS wasn't high enough to be part of that group. And that's something that normally gets associated with like World of Warcraft. But that happens in EverQuest too. Like potentially the currently most social MMO that's still out there. And so like the how much the thumb is on that scale of progression, I think can at times like cause the social aspect, the more organic social aspect to kind of shift away, especially as like content is pushed out to meet the needs of players trying to push content. And so I think like those and I'm not trying to put this as like, oh, that's all bad or negative. I still think of the player who sits and plays Final Fantasy 14, never really interacts with anyone, maybe buys a couple items from the auction house, and goes to the primary story. I still think of that player as being part of that world and part of the MMO, and I still think that they played an MMO, even if they had a single solo player experience. I was talking about playing EverQuest at the beginning. I haven't grouped with anybody. I have my mercenary. Yep. That's why I'm playing it right now.
Well, even in early EverQuest, there were certain classes that could solo, right? So you still have that lone ranger. Yeah, totally. Or like if you're really good at being an enchanter, or like
but they were on the fringes, because they were able to figure it out.
Yeah, fair point. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, so this is actually something I was thinking of right before we started the show. Not expecting us to go into the what is an MMO thing as much, but one thing that's really striking to me right now is how I almost would just say every MMO right now that is currently popular, the grouping experience is the end game experience. There's almost like no incentive to gather with other players before the end. As a weird concept to me for this type of game. But again, people go where the incentives lie. And it's funny you mentioned EQ2 being a social game, because right now I'm in a position where I have two characters in the mid 70s. 80 is the cap right now. Two characters in the mid 70s. And I've grouped almost exclusively. Like almost all of my time is grouping, and it's slow as hell. It's terrible.
Especially in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, Man of Rohan knows as well, because we're also, yeah.
Are there so-called hell levels in EverQuest 2 during that expansion era?
Well, not really. It's more about how they designed progression. And the way that you progress at this point, and a lot of this has changed kind of over the years, because this is like it's not even like a TLP. It's like a kind of faux weird amalgamation of live, but limited to the old expansions. It's kind of a mess, but it's the closest we got. So, but basically it is more effective. Like I grouped, last night or whatever, I had a great time. It was super fun. But in the end, I did some soloing afterwards for like an hour, and I got more gear that I could use, more XP, and just like, it was just 100%. It was like, by all means, better to solo. And I really find that, generally speaking now, until you hit the very end, like, and me and Red argue about this with ESO and ESO dungeons, it's like 99% of the time, if you run a dungeon in ESO, it's just like that flying through experience. Nobody talks, and it's just whatever. Until you hit like the high end, veteran dungeons or trials where you actually have to coordinate. That's every MMO now. It's like, you don't actually have to work with other people because the only hard content, and I know this might rub some people the wrong way, but the only hard content is at the very end. And I really think that's like such a shame. Discluding PvP MMOs.
And that's why they let you bump your character to 130 or whatever now.
Yep.
Because you might as well just play at the top.
Yeah,
that might as well be the only part of the game.
There's these things in MMOs where part of it is sometimes the way that players play creates the thing happening. So like bonuses or like level boosts, that is to me, that's, well, one, yes, they want to make money, but more than that, it's a symptom of players bouncing, because what you're talking about, the game is at the end, right? So if you're playing a game like EverQuest, and like as much as I love EverQuest, I can't recommend it to anyone to play from level 1 to max level right now. Like that is brutal to play through. Like that's why I always suggest, if you're gonna play, wait for a new progression server and start then, when other people are also there. Because if you jump on live right now and you see you have to do 115 levels and you have to do it all solo, that's just a very lonely, awful journey. And that's why they have the bonuses or the level boosts, so that they can maybe connect you with those people that are doing the group content. And that's a symptom, I think, of games that never really found a way to make the solo part either fast enough, rewarding enough, or fun enough. So they have to kind of like push you into the group section.
I'm glad that the conversation has gone to this point, because it reminds me of an MMO I used to play. Did any of you play Conquer Online by chance? Does that name ring a bell?
There's so many MMOs that like I tried for like a week. Like that's probably one of them.
This was actually during the height of the. Oh, my daughter has joined us. Hello. Oh, the cat is back on the chair. I just noticed this. So yeah, Conquer Online came out during the height of, a new Korean MMO was coming out every week type of thing. And the reason I bring it up, and there's a similar feature in City of Heroes, and there's a similar feature in. Hi. Can I help you? You are going to be on YouTube, miss. 1 second. Can I help you? My wife helps.
I'll like kind of fill it a little bit here, because it is funny that he's talking about one of like kind of a several, I don't know, probably dozen MMOs coming out during this time, because I'm sure we'll get into this, but an element of like why we don't group as much, and that being like the splintering of MMO populations, going from 1 to 2 choices to, billion choices.
Well, you also have there's also the whole thing of like, I think there was some comment recently where certain MMOs didn't want some of your time, they wanted all of your time. And so when MMOs tried to get all of your time, that's when you started to see a lot of that fracturing. And that's where so EverQuest wants all of your time. World of Warcraft Classic, it wants all of your time. It's not willing to share it with other games, essentially, not just other MMOs, other games. And that's kind of like some of the things like people have said about games that rely heavily on dailies, like Destiny 2 and stuff like that have this kind of like hamster wheel that you're continuously on. And then they've kind of like shrunk it down bit by bit, but then it becomes like these checklists that you have to do. And so instead of like getting in game to see what kind of adventure is happening that day for whatever reason, you have a set checklist of things you need to complete. And other people may have already completed that checklist. So it's a way of sectioning off the player base even within the game, while also manufacturing retention within the game. So it's kind of this weird thing where MMOs are having more players in the game, but they're doing less together because they're doing the checklist item that doesn't require them to do it together. And there are very few MMOs that don't have the checklist items now. Like it's not just WoW, it's Guild Wars 2, it's ESO, it's literally like pretty much every single MMO has some form of checklist that the games themselves are making the social parts of the MMO less social, sacrificing that to keep you in the game because you're constantly progressing something.
Yeah.
Well,
And I want to come back to that, but I also want to hear about Conquer Online.
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And great point there, Red. Sorry for my daughter. I
No, you're
have
fine.
a tabletop Star Wars game, and I used to have the figures decorating my piano,
Oh,
but
nice.
I had cleaned them. I cleaned my office this past weekend. I had put them somewhere else. So she was looking for those Star Wars tabletop figurines. Anyways, regarding Conquer Online, there's a social feature that City of Heroes, Rift, try to think of Wakfu actually has a version of this, in which Darkfall actually too, in which there's a sidekick, a helper mentor system that there are. This is an interesting bridge because Red, I totally agree with you that there's been this MBA-ification of MMOs in terms of what investors are selecting for in terms of monthly active users, and if you can entice them to play and you get them to do these certain amount of quests, that the C-suite can now generate this report and say, hey, look, activity is up, even though it could rob the soul of it. What's interesting about at least Conquer Online, they found a way. Now, the game did some things horribly wrong, so this I'm not trying to put it up on a golden pedestal. Yet what they did do right is they had a mentorship system that benefited higher level characters returning to lower level zones there's actually two interlocking systems here. One is, I think, where they got it accidentally right, and the other is they so happened to capitalize on it. There were these spots in the game world that higher level characters would specifically farm because the amount of mobs that would spawn were just outrageous. And so you could have a max level character in a level 20 zone specifically farming. Well, because of the accidental design decision, I'm pretty sure it was accidental, and players just figuring out that, hey, per hour I can get the most amount of gold or the most amount of supers or whatever. Well, that so happened to correspond with newbies coming into these lower level zones. Well, what that ended up doing, it did a bunch of things that were fantastic. Number one is when a newbie joined a higher level character and they formed a group, every time that newbie leveled, the higher level character would get some sort of mentorship experience, and they could turn that into higher level resources or rewards. So there was some incentive there. But what it also did from a social perspective, even though there was a backend system for tracking mentor levels and whatever else, what it also did was it connected low level characters with people who are already at the end game. And so it gave them a foreshadowing of, hey, this is what your character can be like. This is what you can do. But it also enabled them to, like, guild battles were really, really popular. And so it was also an on-ramp for these power levelers to say, hey, I'm helping you out. Do you want to join my guild? So it ended up creating this natural feedback loop with something to do for someone at the end game. In other words, what I'm trying to communicate is, instead of Conquer struggling with a top-heavy population, there were these accidental, brilliant design decisions that kept them coming back to lower-level zones. So the game felt populated everywhere because there was actually reasons to go back to these lower-level zones. It kind of reminds me in early EverQuest, where higher-level characters would be farming guards at cities. And so you're walking around, you're like, what is this person doing here? This is a low-level area, but it's actually not. There were staggered reasons to come back from the perspective of your level range. And so just tying that in with what we were talking about earlier is, if the incentive is only or primarily at the end game, then that's where players who enjoy the experience that game generates, that's where they're going to be found. But if you give them reason to cross-pollinate, then those characters, players who enjoy what that game has to provide, they'll also follow where the game is rewarding.
Well, then I'll roll back to that. I totally agree with you as far as that being a way to get people to go back to lower zones and have the world feel more populated, and for people to understand what progression really could mean in an MMO. But as far as like encouraging group play as well, is that and I think some people have tried to do it. Pantheon is definitely trying to do it. But and that is the closer you get to treating groups like real life people would treat each other, the more group play is just has to happen. So, for example, when you kill something and you for a quest and you don't all get that thing, and then you have to go and kill it again, or you have to kill another thing like it. Yes, it's annoying. It is. I get it. You know, oh, I looted this thing and now we got to kill it 5 more times because we're all in the same quest. Okay, that's annoying. But at the same time, it's like that there's only one thing. We shouldn't all get that thing. You know, and I think that you know, or you know, while you're in the group, if you're all getting the same rewards, then I'm like, I might as well do it alone. You know, then you're not helping me, I'm not helping you. We're not experiencing this slower pace the whole time. And so I think as far as encouraging group play, sometimes it has to be not culture influencing politics. It has to be politics influencing culture. You know, as
from
far
a
as
game design perspective. Yeah.
You know,
As someone who suffered through the group solo quest and EverQuest for progression for about a year, because they just stuck with that theory for so damn long. The quests where you would all have to do the same steps over and over again were mind numbing. Like,
yeah,
and I'm not dismissing your point. I'm just saying, like, in that instance, it was like they took that and pushed it all the way this way, because they took all the difficulty of EverQuest and they multiplied it by 6, and then they made it the only way you could raid. And so basically they made a toxic situation out of a non-toxic situation within EverQuest. And that's like in their, what expansion was like there? That's like after Veil of Alaris and stuff like that. So it's part of EverQuest that most people didn't play, but it's where the progression became these quests where the quest people would look forward to and they'd all group up to do together would be the quests where you would have one quest for the whole group, you'd share access, and you'd get the things together. And I think that's also part of, like, it literally was like you had to do it 6 times. And so it, like, some people, and then you have, like, you know, like, oh, I gotta go, sorry, bye, like, after they get their thing. And it created this weird situation. So I think, like, somewhere in the middle where you need people to make it happen. And then we had, like, even before that, when it was like everybody got access, there were plenty of people, especially when it was like it was linked to later progression, like into like being able to raid. You had people coming back to assist more like out of goodwill, or not really goodwill, but because they wanted to do the raid later and they needed this person to do it. And so, like, then they would go and just help. And that would work with the solo quest too. It was more like, okay, the quest itself took so long, and then multiplying that much. So I think the problem there wasn't so much the fact that everyone had to do it. It was the fact that they didn't, there was no innovation in it. They just literally made you do it all. And you couldn't solo it. It was a group only quest that you had to do 6 times over.
Well, so then is the eventual end of all of this always solo? Because we're all playing at our own computer. I'm not out there in the world with all of you people, you know, actually there playing it. I'm doing it at my computer where I have my own time schedule. I have my own, I need to stop when I need to stop. So is that just the inevitable end, you know, a dystopian end of MMO?
Going apocalyptic here.
Yeah, is that we all end up solo players because, you know, that's just the way it ends up happening.
Well, if you look at what's a team, what's a group, it's built up of individuals who, I guess it depends on how you want to split the pie, because if we continue on the EverQuest example, especially early EverQuest, Red, you'd have to fill me in on what retail looks like. But what's really, really interesting is, at least with respect to like P99, for example, you could be in a group with other people. So thus you're shedding the solo label, but you still have an individual role. And so depending on how we want to delineate, I guess, responsibility or impact, there's, in my mind, like, I do understand the divorce between, from a game design perspective, are you emphasizing grouping and soloing? But what's also equally interesting is within a role specific game like EverQuest or at the higher echelons of rating in these in different MMOs in which your role matters, there's still individual, or how should I say this? I guess you're still soloing your role. And so there's this really interesting sort of alloy that's being developed that kind of transcends that boundary. But to Red's point, where the developers choose to pressure and emphasize on that spectrum of gameplay features, if they overemphasize a solo role outside of the context of a group, then that is where the genre ends up. But if there is a way to still capture the value of an individual role within something that's a bit more broad socially, then you can have that dance. But to Red's point, it depends on how much pressure the developers have for that balance. Mm-hmm. And admittedly, it's tough. It's obviously not easy to do because a lot of MMOs that have tried to play the let's encourage grouping by artificial difficulty. I mean, even Red's example with the explicit quest requirements, like that's not fun. Even though EverQuest, one of the reasons it's so well beloved is, at least historically, it has been a difficult game, and that has encouraged grouping. But it shouldn't be punishing, like he was discussing.
So I definitely want to unload a few things here. So one, I think I mentioned this earlier. Players go where the incentives are. And that's, I mean, I shouldn't even say players, people. People go where the incentives are. And everyone does have their own goals. And this is where I'm going to unpack a few things. This might be a little bit outside of scope of solo and group, but I mean, we've already gotten a little philosophical here.
So we went meta pretty quick.
Yeah. So people aren't buying solar panels because they're actually good.
Oh my gosh.
Keep going.
You completely throw me off there. Okay. So people go where the incentives are, and they are incentivized to follow whatever goal, so they want to take the path of least resistance to their goal. What is the goal in most MMOs now? Number go up. We want number go up. And I joke about this all the time, but that is in essence what almost all of these games do for us, is that little chemical rush of number go up. And so we will do whatever we can to make number go up fast as possible, as much as possible, with as little resistance as possible. There's a little fuzzy area there with, I have friends and sometimes I want friends to come with me when number go up, but that's not like the first consideration, I would argue. I would say that for most people, that is not the first consideration. Not to say there's not exceptions, but most people, like, the first thing on their mind is not play with other people regardless. Like, there's some minimum goal or need that they have with a game before they'll play it. So outside of that, though, the enemies of, I would say, actual social experiences, I have 3 in my heads right now, but I want to ask you guys a question first.
And there's 3 of
before
us.
I unpack. Yes, 3 enemies of grouping is Merle, Red, and Man of Rohan. Those are the enemies. No, but
Rider on a black horse. Yeah.
So I have a question though, because we all have a pretty wide gaming, experience. Are sandbox games inherently more social than, I guess you'd say, like linear games?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't mean to butt in here, but Red earlier described EverQuest in practice was extremely, this is going to offend my soul saying this, but he's right. It was extremely linear.
Oh, yeah.
Even though the main quest wasn't specifically telling you where to go, but if you rolled a Wood Elf Druid, you first started at the Druid Spires, then you went up to Orc Hill, then you went to Crushbone, and then you went to Unrest. Like, everyone had the same way of doing it. So in a way, the actual progression loop, depending on where you were, was incredibly linear, but it was one of the most social games I've ever played. On the flip side, we started the conversation talking about Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxies, these completely open-ended titles that were also intrinsically social. So it's interesting that that social play does, and I'm willing to be proven wrong here, I'm just kind of throwing out my thoughts. It doesn't seem to be a function of, are we developing a sandbox or something linear? Unless, do you disagree?
I disagree that it was linear. Yes, that maybe.
What about in practice?
Maybe the vehicle to play was fight. That's it. Like, there were quests, but who cared? Except a quest to get my epic weapon or my whatever. There were very few quests that mattered.
Well, I got to butt in here because maybe we do have to define linear, but I'm tying linear to, like, the ultimate goal is power increase, right? Like number go
I
up.
misunderstood. Okay.
And so I mean, linear in the sense of gameplay as well, I suppose, but it's more a product of that desire. And so I differentiate sandbox versus linear in the sense of sandbox is I just kind of like do what I want to do in the context of whatever rules the game provides for me, versus linear would be I have a set kind of ramping of power or whatever you want to call that, where if I get past a certain point, I trivialize the things under it. And in that sense, I would say EQ is absolutely linear in both degrees of that.
So
with Man of Rohan's kind of, sorry, I want to make sure Man of Rohan finishes because I technically interrupted him first.
Because where I was going, that is, like, Minecraft is absolutely a sandbox.
Minecraft is a sandbox, yeah.
But there is absolutely progression.
There is progression.
Because if I have a diamond pickaxe, it's better than the iron pickaxe. And I'm progressing towards that because I want to get things faster. I want to build things in a way that I want, and I like the progression. I like doing something that's better than it was before. So, but I'm choosing to do that, and I'm in EverQuest, yes, the vehicle was still fight and get better at that, and get your stats go up because of that, and get more gear. But it was open. It was not a sandbox. I don't think it is. But the idea of it was still very open because you could do that in any zone. You didn't have to do the same there. You could get together as a group and go very slowly and just enjoy the whatever you were doing. And oftentimes you had to because you were trying to get this rare drop. And that was just, was forced upon you. So I don't think it was linear, because I was thinking like the entire focus of the game would be a story or whatever.
I would say, like, the primary goal of the game is to make yourself, level 50, right? So everything you're doing to get to level 50, whether, it could be grouping or soloing or whatever, but you want to take whatever is most effective. When you first started, what you said was like, we played just to fight. And in that sense, I think I really disagree. I think that might be more of a product of the age that it came out, of kind of fulfilling a fantasy of playing like D&D with friends or something like that, where people weren't necessarily in the mode of, I want to play this to, like, hit max level or anything. So it may have been more prevalent back then to just be like, hey, I just want to play because, like, it's a very novel thing to see other players around. That kind of a thing. But I don't think that holds up to time as people have become acclimated to linear games where the goal is.
So I want to circle back to EverQuest and being linear. But before that, I want to say like what's been kind of like percolating in my head, and it's either gonna be like brilliant or absolute dog shit. I'm not sure yet what it is.
Sometimes you just got to taste it and find out, man.
So you're talking about the sandboxes versus linear games and like basically being social, either one being social. And I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, like for me, like thinking about it that way, a sandbox game, because it allows you so many different directions, is inherently going to end up or going to start out antisocial because you don't have a race to run. So you're not all running the same race in the same direction. A linear game, you're all starting out and running in the same direction. So you may not be communicating with the person next to you, but you are running in the same direction. And so but then a sandbox game, like we talked about earlier in the game, has these pockets because of how the game systems interact that create the potential for players to create a social experience outside of the race, essentially. So like it wasn't doing the missions in Star Wars Galaxies or even having a house because it was such a big freaking game that made it social to me. It was going to a cantina after running the missions. So it was just like this one, and I don't even think it was necessarily like something that they thought of as being like, this is going to be a huge social thing. It was just one of those things that they put in the game.
I frankly believe that they just were making games back then.
Oh yeah,
they're just like let's just throw stuff
fun.
again.
Yeah,
but it comes down to and I think of that like the long way to say that is basically I think of both games as having the potential for a lot of social gameplay just in different ways, and then the linear game starts with more social because you're starting the race in the same place. But,
if everybody starts at the same time.
But entropy.
Entropy, yeah.
So basically entropy, basically the game gets to a point where you have like the linear game, you have so many people running the same race and they're running that they're people are like on lap 17, people are on lap 1, people are on lap 3, people are on lap 6. And so it starts to become this unwieldy thing where you cannot create a social experience for everyone running the race anymore. What was originally a very social thing becomes antisocial because it is impossible to collect everyone in the same place because people just spread out. And then the sandbox games, it suffers similarly because it is so large. There are so many different ways that the chances of butting into each other get smaller and smaller because people have gone off on their own directions. And the further they go on those own directions. So the crafter is less likely to run into the person playing the missions all the time. They may have earlier both gone back to that cantina, but now they have found the place that they want to go hunt. They have found they have created their empire in the desert of Tatooine, and that's where they have all their what were they called, the machines that they have like basically harvesting for them. So that's where they spend all their time. So like the idea is that entropy in these games creates an antisocial situation the longer the game is out. So even the most social game at the beginning will eventually become antisocial just by having existed so long.
So it's the expansion of the universe with respect to player populations and MMOs.
Yes. Basically.
Well, I solved it. I think there should be a lottery to suddenly, as even if you're a top player, you are suddenly a lower level. You must be.
Oh my gosh.
So new players join. And if any new players join, like, okay, well, this 10% of players is now level 10.
Dude,
enjoy it.
I used to be in favor of wealth redistribution in MMOs, okay? Because I used to get so frustrated that everyone had been playing for 10 years and I came into the game and I got my little 2 plat from this one kill. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. You need 2 million to buy anything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It reminds me of different like Dungeons and Dragons Online. There's a Neverwinter Nights Persistent World I occasion called Arlith. You have incentive after you've leveled sufficiently. Actually, Conquer Online did this too. You could reincarnate your character. So after completing whatever the initial journey was, you can start over again, and thus your veterans become new players to follow that track that Red you just described. So it is interesting to see that how some MMOs try to navigate that problem of entropy.
We call it progeny around here.
I was about to say he's so close to saying the P word.
I think the closest I've seen where a game trying to tackle it head on has been World of Warcraft. Because it's to some people it's very popular, to some people it's very unpopular. But when they did the level squish, essentially what they did was they just lopped off part of the race. So they shrunk down the race a little bit so that you're no longer running that far ahead. Now, instead of being 60 levels ahead, you are 10 levels ahead. They shrunk it down to a point where it became more manageable and less, and they're going to have to do it again soon at this point.
Right.
But it's one of those things where they tried to tackle this problem that happens in MMOs head on, and it kind of worked and kind of didn't work.
Well, okay.
Yeah, because
sorry.
go ahead. Yeah.
No, okay. I would agree that that step of the level squish and all of that was totally a social benefit. Sorry about my phone. But I would definitely disagree that World of Warcraft is a good example. I don't think that was their main
I just an attempt
kind of consideration. But yeah, I do think the effect did at least push the needle, but that's a great example of my first thing that I believe is an enemy of games maintaining their social tendencies. There we go. Social tendencies over a period of time. And that's linear progression, especially as you widen the gap. If the gap is extremely wide, that social incentive is less and less because there's less people. I mean, that's kind of the main one. But B, they tend to try to make it faster to go through that to kind of compensate for the increase in the high end, and it just keeps going until they have to do this kind of level squish. And I think the effect of the level squish making the game more social is a product of that, or not a product. It is a example of that problem, but they just didn't quite go far enough because it's happening again, because they keep just adding on the high end, and now they have the same problem, and they're going to have to put it back together. And it's kind of a never-ending problem. And so in that sense, I would say sandbox games are inherently more social than linear progression as the main goal kind of games, for the sake of over time, they don't diminish. I would actually argue that they expand because people figure out new things. I'm thinking of Landmark, people figuring out how to do all this crazy stuff. And, there was a lot of social ties to that game because people were just figuring stuff out. There was no progression in that game, but people still got connected with each other. Probably the most controversial thing I'll say in this entire episode, because I know we've got a lot of time, but I want to say the most social game that is currently out on the market right now, and probably least likely for anyone that's listening to this to play, is actually Mortal Online 2.
I was like, the longer you held on to it, I was like, that's going to be Mortal Online 2. You're going to say Mortal Online 2.
It all comes back because it's mostly sandbox. There is some progression, but it's kind of it's in the sense of, it's more like old Star Wars Galaxies where you can only progress maybe 1/20th of the total skills in the game. And so it's kind of you could, if you really wanted to, you could crank that out in a few days. But when it comes down to it, the power difference between a fresh start and a, person that's been playing for 1,000 years isn't nearly what it is for a linear progression as the primary goal. That game is literally just a bunch of tools put together in a way that purposefully or accidentally incentivizes people getting together. And part of that is because the world is dangerous, not just because players, but even like soloing that in that game is kind of like, I mean, A, it's dangerous, but it's also just like the enemies, you know, like you could get slapped down pretty hard.
Is this where you announce that you have officially pledged to Ashes of Creation because you want the world to be dangerous for you with PvP?
I haven't pledged to Ashes of Creation because their PvP it's not the same, and it won't have the same social effects. I can guarantee you.
So
Desryn, I'm curious, based on your description of Mortal Online, do you have a different opinion of Albion Online?
Albion, you could pretty much progress that whole game solo. I think that's kind of the difference. Like I played for probably 40 some hours or so. Basically, you know, got my skills pretty far along, and then I did one trip through a zone where I got, you know, pounced on and lost like, you know, everything. And I was kind of like, meh. I didn't have a single social experience in that whole 40 hours. Yeah.
Okay, so in context to Albion, which has a open-ended leveling system in which one character can learn a lot of different things, similar to Final Fantasy XIV, actually, now that I think about it. However, it's also sandbox right? There's, to my knowledge, not a main quest. There's sort of an initial tutorial. There's, region-specific economies with biomes generating at different rates, different materials, and this guild conquest system. I'm curious, from your perspective, on the surface, it seems like there's a decent amount of overlap between Albion Online and Mortal Online 2. I'm curious, based on your experience, what separates them from, even though they're both sandboxy and there's both open world PvP and there's both territory control systems, what's the difference?
I think the progression definitely feels very different. The world feels very different. But the progression, in the sense, like I said, I basically just like soloed, like no problem, because they have, you know, a lot of safe zones, and really you're very knowledgeable about like when I'm risking something.
Okay.
And the other side of that is, correct me if I'm wrong, does Albion actually have gear degradation? I know this is like side thing, but I think
like
it
a
is
durability system on each.
Like,
that's a good question. I think I've lost all of mine more quickly than if there is, but that's a good question. I don't know.
I think that's actually like part of it, because one thing that keeps the power differential of Mortal Online so squished is that there is no item in the game that you can wear that lasts forever. And the difference in power is much more small. And then the incentives, I it's been a little bit since I played Albion, so feel free to correct me, but like the incentives on like why do you play Mortal Online 2 is almost entirely social. There's a little bit of element of like kind of fantasy, like class fantasy. And I think the other side of that is like so you can only do like 1/20th of the game on a single character, and technically you can only have one character on an account. So that's you know, and you are so limited that you have to rely on other people for other services because of that limitation. But also just like, what do I want to do in the game? Like, why does someone pick up that game? And every single answer is gonna be social. You might have some people that are like, I'm hardcore, like I just want to, be so freaking good that, I just 1v1 the crap out of people, all the time. But then when it comes down to is you're probably putting so many more hours into the game trying to like stay hidden, and like stay, away from people, that you're just kind of like wasting your time, when if you just made some friends, you'd be safer, you'd progress better, and you'd have access to better resources. Like everything in that game really kind of like steers you towards making connections, even if it's just out of need. But then like, why do you play? It's like, I mean, I want to build an empire with my friends. That's like pretty common, because that's what the game gives you as tools. But when it comes down to it, having their territory control and stuff, like having all of that, it doesn't necessarily make you more powerful than Joe Schmo that's only been playing for like 10 hours, but people still like it because they make these ties, and then there's drama, and then there's, all this stuff that you can kind of act out on. Whereas I really feel like Albion is a more limited game. Like they want to push PvP in this specific, circumstance or for these reasons. It feels more limited, and it also feels less social. And I, again, I don't have hundreds of hours into it, but 40 some hours, I think should be pretty good for.
Did
I
you know
agree.
you can't have an opinion of an MMO unless you have at least 100 hours?
100 hours, yeah.
Speaking
That's
of
the YouTube thing, right? That's the
that is the YouTube
that's
thing.
just kind of the stigma, right? You can't have an opinion unless you've put that much time.
Yeah. And speaking of time,
Yeah.
we are 45 minutes over.
Sorry, guys. I must have instigated it.
I do want to, because the original question was about that, and I will give you this, Des. I will say that certain aspects of being social are more resilient in a sandbox MMO, that they can exist because the game itself tries to have connections, right? So a trader needs to work with a crafter, kind of thing. Those kind of that's a very broad generalization, but I'm thinking of like the blacksmith in Ultima Online needs someone to sell their goods to, kind of thing. But it does eventually spread out too much, especially when there are things in the game that enable it to, like vendors that are offline or things like that basically like cut that out. Star Wars Galaxies just had tons of houses, had a vendor list. You just go to the vendor.
Right, but you're
There's no
talking
one
about
there.
stuff they added that kind of squelched that side of things
through time because they needed to. That like
Did they though?
Because it like it's not something that was. What I think when we look back at MMOs, I think we tend to look back and like, man, that sucks when they did this one thing a lot of times, without thinking of like, why did they do it? Normally there's a reason why, and normally it's a drop in player base. Normally it's a request from players. It is players saying, this really sucks and I don't want to do it anymore. Why can't I just sell my stuff whenever I want to? Why do I have to find someone to do it? Why do I have to say looking for group for 3 hours? Why can't I just have a group? Doesn't mean that the solutions are good. It just means that normally they're coming from somewhere because developers are trying to make players happy. It's just a lot of times players don't really know what we want. But
I was about to say, players are essentially not very trustworthy when it comes to like understanding a vision of a game. And I understand like player counts drop and player counts equal money equals game keep going. So like it makes sense why they would cater to things. And I know I've talked about this before in like a billion different circles, but like I truly believe that just as in 99 when EverQuest kind of blows up, fulfills a lot of fantasies for people, for a lot of things that like people like, oh man, this is just so cool. I don't think we have to have one MMO to rule them all anymore. I really want to just, I want the industry to go in a way where we have MMOs that are extremely targeted for a type of experience. And I think that's one reason why MMOs currently suck at retaining players is because they're not different enough to like, there's no harm in just going from like, oh, I'm going to go from WoW to like Guild Wars 2. Like, it's not really a crazy jump. Like, but if you're saying, I'm going to go from WoW to Mortal Online 2. Now you're going to Mortal Online 2 because they've got a very specific experience, but the population is not very high. And I think that's fine. I think that's fine.
Well,
because in the end, they haven't
agree.
budged. They haven't convenienced the social nature out of their game. So
yeah, well, you think about the parallel to like pop music. You see a lot of stars that originally had a hyper niche in terms of their audience, their messaging, the texture of their music. They suddenly get popular. They go to Nashville. The guy that's produced every top 100 starts producing their albums. Now they sound like everybody else. And so you end up having this homogenization, even in the music world. And so you see that in MMOs too.
Like I'm feeling a little called out because I started out as the niche EverQuest guy on YouTube, and now I cover freaking World of Warcraft and Throne of Liberty. So I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up. Marl, thank you so much for joining us and hanging out with us for so long.
Man.
We're almost
thank you for the invite. This
basically
was
2
awesome.
episodes essentially.
No, thank you. You guys are awesome.
Yeah,
Please.
we're definitely gonna have to change the title of this one though. Right,
I don't know
Red?
what the title's gonna be. I'm just gonna call this Entropy.
Well,
Existential something. What is an MMO?
our MMO social. I
Yeah.
think that's pretty.
Yeah,
That's mostly what we've been talking
hey,
about,
I
right?
like
Our
that, yeah,
MMO
uh-huh.
social. Yeah,
There you go.
Marl
What-
has a cat. That's what we should call it.
right. That was a great cat. That was
Nala's chill. Yeah, I have another cat too, a Siamese, and there's actually a third cat in the house. That's another story, but that just gets more complicated the more I talk about it. So
3 cats and it's difficult. But
Right.
Marl, please tell everybody where they can find you. Obviously, the links will be down in the description, but please let people know what you cover and where they can find you.
sure. So I'm basically only on YouTube. I mean, I have a Twitter X. I'll call it Twitter account. But mostly on YouTube. My channel, my daughter's right here. So if you see any arms blaring into the camera, then that's my progeny. So I'm MarleMMO. I think that's just what the title or the channel name is. I cover a vast swath of different topics and MMOs. In fact, I relate quite a bit to Red in terms of I originally started covering hyper niche MMOs because even in what we were just talking about in terms of super targeted experiences. That's what was super interesting to me. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't going to watch a video about a game that they know very little about. And so the selection pressure, obviously, I expanded that. But in part because I've also played the vast majority of MMOs since 1999. So even though ESO for me isn't the most riveting MMO experience, I've still probably played 200 hours of it, right? So I cover a large swath of MMOs, though my interest is twofold. Number one would be niche MMOs. So if you're wanting to look at titles that you haven't heard of before, then check out my channel, and there's quite a bit of content there. Secondarily, reaching all the way back to the beginning of my monologue, the introduction, is I feel my daughter pressing against my... That was funny. A little phantom me. But secondarily, just due to my background, when I've covered like Guild Wars 2 or Lord of the Rings Online, I've covered ESO, I've covered some of the big ones too. I also take a very careful look, especially because of the resources of some of these companies. In my mind, they have a higher responsibility and a higher expectation from a player's perspective of doing the right thing. And obviously that's a subjective title or I'm being really distracted here. But to me, that there's more ownership on them to do it right. And I explore what that means in context to my background in music or storytelling from a classics perspective, narratology, but also with my background of coming up and cutting my teeth on EverQuest. And so looking at it from a historical perspective as well. And then sometimes I discuss different combat elements as it relates to my journey in martial arts. And so just based on my background, my experience, I try to weave that in where it's relevant and when it adds value to a viewer. So it's a little snippet for me. But again, thank you everyone for the lovely conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate
Thank you guys.
Desryn, man of Rohan. I'm just
okay. I'll just because mine's easy. Desryn does on Twitter, X, Twix as.
Twix,
But
yeah.
I do technically have a YouTube and a Twitch, but I almost exclusively do things with Pantheon Plus, and that's going to be Pantheon Plus on Twitter, Pantheon Plus on YouTube, Pantheon Plus on Twitch, all sorts of mostly group centric things, funny enough, but it's kind of what we do, and I'll pass it to. I did
Is
the
that
thing
me over there? I don't know. Yeah,
Probably not.
Nope.
I'm Man of Rohan wherever it's at. So YouTube, Twix, and that's all that matters. But well, there are others that matter. I'm sorry, other places out there, Rumble, and I'm not on Rumble.
All
but
the places.
other
OnlyFans.
not OnlyFans. Oh god, no. There's no OnlyFans Man of Rohan. I promise you.
I checked.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Oh no, I've been found
Getting
out.
weird ads now that I've searched that to my address bar.
That's yeah. So yeah. Don't let Google hear me say that, because now I'm going to get some ads on the side. So great. So yeah, no. So yep, you can catch my music there. The music that I have is it's not a lot that's there. But,
It's fantastic.
It's there. So
Marl, I think you would like Man of Rohan's channel. I think quite a bit.
Yeah, you brought up music. Yeah,
Yep.
that's super cool. Super cool.
All right, thank you all so much. Oh, there's a cat. Hello, kitty. We all just automatically distracted by a cat.
Yep. We're all,
I was like, oh, what's up?
What outro?
Right.
Thank you all so much for
can-
watching, and we'll be back next month with something, I guess. Maybe.
see ya.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye, everybody.